Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we uncover the darkest stories. Today, a deadly love triangle leads to betrayal and murder. Barbara and James were the picture of happiness in Brookfield, a town where everyone knew each other's business but still managed to keep their lives relatively private. They were a couple who seemed to have it all: youth, success, and a love story that had captivated their friends and family. James, a charismatic entrepreneur, had a way of making everyone feel important. His business acumen had earned him respect in the community, and his relationship with Barbara seemed to solidify his perfect life. Barbara, a beloved schoolteacher, was kind and gentle, with a smile that lit up any room she entered. Together they were seen as the ideal pair, well matched, admired and envied by others. Their bond seemed unbreakable. They spent weekends together, hiking through the nearby woods, attending community events, and enjoying the quiet comfort of their home, which they had made their own. Yet, beneath this picture-perfect exterior, there were cracks ones Barbara had worked hard to hide. The memories of Ryan, an ex-lover from her past, lingered in the back of her mind. Before meeting James, Barbara and Ryan had shared an intense, passionate love affair. They were inseparable, consumed by each other, until life took them down separate paths. Ryan had been reckless, impulsive, and deeply in love, but Barbara had ultimately decided to move on, convinced that she wanted a more stable life with James. Even so, the connection with Ryan had never quite been severed. Barbara hadn't seen him in years, but she still thought about him often, remembering the thrill he had brought into her life. Over time, she convinced herself that she had moved on, that her love for James was real and lasting. But deep inside, there remained an unspoken longing, a whisper of what could have been. Little did James know, this old flame still had the power to ignite something inside her. Ryan, for his part, had never truly let go of Barbara. He kept his distance for a while, allowing her to build her life with James, but as the years passed, his obsession grew. He followed Barbara's life from afar, watching her from the shadows, unable to let go of the idea that she was meant to be with him. This silent yearning, festering for years, would eventually lead to a devastating series of events that would tear apart the lives of everyone involved. As time passed, the tension in Barbara and James's relationship began to grow, unnoticed by him but keenly felt by her. At first it was small things, slight shifts in Barbara's mood, moments when she seemed distant, her gaze drifting away when they were together. James attributed these changes to stress from her work, the pressures of teaching, and the demands of their everyday lives. He was busy with his business, and she, as always, was nurturing and caring, making sure everything ran smoothly. Yet Barbara's detachment grew harder to ignore. Behind closed doors, Barbara found herself increasingly drawn to Ryan. Their past had never truly disappeared. She tried to suppress her emotions, telling herself that she had moved on, that she was happy with James. But there were moments when she would remember Ryan's touch, the fire between them, and the way he made her feel alive in ways that James no longer did. It wasn't that she didn't love James, she did, in a way. But it was different from the passion she had once shared with Ryan. The thrill of the unknown, the electricity of a forbidden connection, still lingered in the corners of her mind. Ryan, knowing the cracks in Barbara's life with James were widening, began to worm his way back into her world. He reached out to her under the guise of a concerned friend, reminding her of the bond they had once shared. He was patient, never pushing too hard, but always there when Barbara needed someone to talk to. At first, their encounters were innocent enough: casual chats over coffee, long phone calls filled with memories and nostalgia. But Ryan knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just rekindling their friendship, he was reawakening the old flame that had never truly died. Barbara found herself looking forward to their meetings. Ryan's presence stirred something inside her that she hadn't felt in years. His attention made her feel desired, seen in a way that she missed. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to deny the growing attraction between them. What started as an innocent reconnection soon turned into something more dangerous, an affair that could unravel everything she had built with James. Ryan's obsession, however, went beyond rekindling an old romance. As Barbara grew more emotionally entangled with him, Ryan began to see James not just as an obstacle but as the person who had stolen Barbara from him all those years ago. What had begun as longing had turned into a deep, consuming desire for revenge. He wanted Barbara back, and he was willing to go to extreme lengths to make it happen. The weight of Barbara's internal conflict became unbearable as the affair with Ryan escalated. Each day felt like a tightrope walk between the life she had built with James and the reckless allure of her past with Ryan. Barbara had convinced herself that her relationship with James was strong, that their love was real, but every moment spent with Ryan chipped away at that belief. Their secret meetings had become more frequent, their encounters filled with longing and desire. What started as a stolen kiss in a secluded park had quickly evolved into a passionate, all-consuming affair. Every touch, every whispered word, fueled the fire that neither of them could control. Barbara knew she was playing a dangerous game, but she couldn't seem to stop. Ryan's presence made her feel alive in a way that James no longer could. With James it was comfortable, secure. But with Ryan it was wild and unpredictable, the kind of love that felt forbidden and exciting. The moments they shared felt like stolen treasures, full of intensity and heat, and it was in those stolen moments that Barbara felt truly seen. But it wasn't just the affair itself that had taken over Barbara's thoughts. Ryan was becoming more desperate, more demanding. His feelings had turned from longing to obsession. He began to talk about the future, about taking Barbara away from James for good. He wasn't just trying to rekindle their past, he wanted to erase James entirely. Ryan's plans grew darker as he realized that Barbara, caught in the whirlwind of emotion, was slipping further from his grasp with every passing day. Barbara tried to back away, to sever the ties between them, but it was no use. Ryan's intensity pushed her further into his world. The more she tried to pull away, the more he pulled her in. The line between love and obsession had blurred, and the consequences of their actions began to feel inevitable. One evening, as the tension between Barbara, Ryan, and James reached its peak, Barbara made a decision that would haunt her forever. She agreed to meet Ryan alone at a secluded spot, a place they had once shared in happier times. She thought she could end it there, that she could tell Ryan the affair was over, that she had to stay with James. But Ryan's obsession had taken over, and he had other plans. His jealousy had reached a boiling point, and in that moment it was no longer about love, it was about revenge. Ryan, consumed by his need to have Barbara for himself, took matters into his own hands. As Barbara begged him to stop, to let her go, the violence of his emotions erupted. It was in this chaotic moment, as Ryan's rage spilled over, that the darkness of his obsession manifested in the most horrifying way possible. Barbara's world collapsed, and the consequences of her decisions became irreversible. She had unknowingly walked into a trap of her own making, and the fatal turn her life would take was already set in motion. The aftermath of Barbara's death shattered James in ways he never imagined. When the police arrived at the scene, they found him standing in shock, his eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened. One moment he had been planning a quiet evening at home, and the next, he was thrust into a nightmare. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the horrifying scene before him, but everything felt like it was happening in a blur. The police questioned him, trying to piece together the events, but James's mind was foggy. He had no idea how he had ended up there, only that Barbara was gone. As the investigation unfolded, the authorities quickly zeroed in on James as the prime suspect. It seemed all too convenient, a man discovering his wife's affair with another man, caught in a fit of jealousy, snapping and committing murder. The police found traces of Barbara's blood on James's clothes and a broken phone, which led them to believe he had been involved in a violent altercation with her. The evidence was damning, and it wasn't long before rumors spread throughout the town. James, once the charming businessman, was now the man who had been consumed by rage and killed his wife. Despite the mounting pressure, James insisted he was innocent. He couldn't have killed Barbara, he loved her, and the thought of hurting her was unfathomable. But the evidence pointed in his direction, and soon it seemed like everyone had already made up their mind. It was an open and shut case, or so it appeared. James's reputation, once flawless, now hung by a thread. His world was crumbling around him, and there was no one to turn to. In the meantime, the investigation into Barbara's murder continued to unfold. Detective Heller, a seasoned investigator with a sharp eye for detail, began to notice discrepancies in the evidence that didn't sit right with him. He couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that something was off about the entire situation. Something didn't add up. The blood on James's clothes seemed too neatly placed, almost as if it had been planted. And there were other strange clues that hinted at a deeper, more sinister motive. As Detective Heller dug further into Barbara's life, he uncovered the affair with Ryan, a name that kept cropping up in their investigation. Interviews with friends and colleagues revealed that Barbara had been struggling with guilt over the affair, often confiding in those closest to her about her emotional turmoil. But what was most unsettling was the discovery of Ryan's whereabouts the night of the murder. His alibi didn't check out, and the more the detective learned, the clearer it became Ryan had been involved, but the question was how. James, still reeling from the accusations against him, found a new resolve. He couldn't stand by and let his life be destroyed by a crime he didn't commit. With the help of a savvy defense lawyer, he began to piece together his own version of events, hoping to prove his innocence. It was a race against time, as Detective Heller closed in on Ryan, piecing together the truth of what had happened. But with each revelation, it became more clear that the twisted web of lies and obsession that Ryan had woven would soon be exposed, and the truth would come to light, though the damage was already done. As the trial approached, the tension in Brookfield reached a fever pitch. The town, once full of admiration for James and Barbara, was now divided. Half the town believed James was guilty, his temper the cause of his wife's untimely death. The other half held out hope, wondering if the man they once knew had been framed by someone far more dangerous. James's life hung in the balance, his future uncertain as he waited for the courtroom battle that would determine his fate. Ryan, ever the manipulator, had carefully orchestrated every detail to make it seem like James was the murderer. He had planted evidence, subtly twisted the narrative, and even staged the crime scene to make it look like a fit of rage had overtaken James when he found out about the affair. Ryan's obsession had clouded his judgment, and he believed that if he could destroy James, he could win back Barbara's love. But his plan had a flaw, one that Detective Heller quickly noticed. As the investigation deepened, Heller began to see through Ryan's carefully crafted lies. The breakthrough came when a forensic expert uncovered a critical piece of evidence: Ryan's fingerprints on the murder weapon. The weapon, a knife that had been used to kill Barbara, was found at the scene, but its positioning had raised doubts. The investigation had initially overlooked the knife's location, but upon closer inspection, it was clear that it had been moved to make it look like an impulsive act of violence. Further analysis revealed traces of Ryan's blood on the blade, linking him directly to the crime. The evidence against him mounted, and the investigators realized they had been dealing with someone far more calculating than they had originally thought. As Ryan's role in Barbara's death became undeniable, he began to unravel. In court he sat motionless, his eyes betraying no emotion as the weight of his actions settled in. His once smooth, convincing demeanor had faltered under the pressure of the evidence, and the truth began to bleed through the cracks. Ryan had meticulously planned the murder, and his obsession with Barbara had led him down a dark path from which there was no return. His need for control and revenge had blinded him to the consequences of his actions, and now the town knew the full extent of his betrayal. James, though exonerated, was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. The trauma of the accusation, the pain of losing his wife, and the humiliation of being falsely accused left deep scars. Even as he was cleared of all charges, the weight of Barbara's death hung over him. The town's sympathy was tempered by suspicion, and James couldn't help but wonder if he would ever fully escape the shadows of the tragedy that had consumed his life. Ryan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his obsession with Barbara now fully realized as the source of his destruction. But as the trial concluded, James's fight was far from over. The love triangle that had spiraled out of control had cost him everything: his peace, his reputation, and the woman he had once loved. The town of Brookfield, forever marked by the tragedy, would never be the same. In the end, the story of deception, revenge, and fatal obsession was a stark reminder of the dangerous consequences that can arise when love turns into something darker.